The seventh meeting of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development. I would just like to assure members that the sound test with the witnesses has been done, so we're all set for a liftoff here. I think everyone who's here as a witness probably has been a witness before at this committee or other committees during the hybrid format, so you all know the protocols. Please keep your mics on mute when not speaking so we can avoid ambient noise and so on. Today we have two panels. We have two panels, one hour each, and we have with us from 6:30 to 7:30 the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, represented by Rumina Velshi, President and CEO, Ramzi Jamal, Executive Vice President and Chief Regulatory Operations Officer, and Kavita Murphy, Director General, Nuclear Cycle and Facilities Regulation. And from the Department of Natural Resources, we have Molly Johnson, Assistant Deputy Minister, Low Carbon Energy Sector, Jim Delaney, Director, Uranium and Radioactive Waste Division, and Justin Hanna, Director, Nuclear Energy Division. So from each group, we have an opening statement of 3 minutes. I imagine, Ms. Velshi, you'll be doing the opening statement. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Chair and members of the committee, my name is Rumina Velshi, and I'm joining you from Toronto in the traditional territory of many nations and now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Besides being the President and CEO of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, or the CNSC, Canada's independent nuclear safety regulator, I'm also currently the chair of the International Atomic Energy Agency's, the IAEA's, Commission on Safety Standards, which establishes standards for the global nuclear community, including for radioactive waste. I want to register 4 points with you today. First, the CNSC was established by Parliament in 2000 by the Nuclear Safety and Control Act as an independent quasi-judicial tribunal with the authority to regulate all nuclear facilities and activities in Canada, including radioactive wastes. We report to Parliament through the Minister of Natural Resources. We do not report to the Minister. The Minister exerts no control over the CNSC's day-to-day activities or on its decisions. The Commission's decisions, which are based on the best available science and an understanding of the risks involved, can be reviewed only by a federal court. These are the cornerstones of our independence. Second, under the strong regulatory oversight of our highly competent staff, radioactive waste in Canada has been managed safely for decades, including its handling, processing, transportation, and storage. In Canada, licensees are directly responsible for safely managing all of their radioactive wastes. They are required to maintain financial guarantees that ensure they will have the resources to safely terminate their licensed activities and safely dispose of all radioactive material and equipment. Third, the CNSC has a modern, comprehensive, and mature regulatory framework that is consistent with the Government of Canada's nuclear policies. Our framework is also aligned with international standards and best practices. This was confirmed by a 2019 peer review conducted by the IAEA. Finally, I want to stress to you the importance the CNSC places on ensuring that what we do is open, fair, and transparent. Our hearing process is designed to encourage participation from everyone with an interest, especially Indigenous nations and communities and the public. We are in communities early to build an understanding of our processes. We communicate with interested participants through a variety of channels, and we offer funding to enable full participation. Let me conclude by emphasizing that our interest is safety above all else. Thank you, Miigwech.
Thank you very much, Ms. Velshi. We'll go now to Ms. Johnson.
Fantastic. Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity to speak about nuclear waste management and governance in Canada. I'd like to recognize that I'm joining you today from my office in Ottawa, which is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Nuclear energy is an important part of Canada's energy mix. It currently accounts for 15% of our electricity generation and contributes to Canada's 82% non-emitting electricity supply. While nuclear provides Canada with a source of non-emitting energy, as well as medical isotopes that are vital to both Canada and the world, it also produces radioactive waste, which needs to be carefully managed. Protecting the health and safety of Canadians and the environment is the government's top priority regarding nuclear energy. The government is committed to continuous improvement with respect to ensuring that safe solutions are in place for managing radioactive waste and decommissioning now and into the future. This commitment is supported by Canada's independent, international, peer-reviewed nuclear regulator, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, which reports to Parliament through the Minister of Natural Resources and whose regulatory decisions are only reviewable by the federal court. The most recent review by the International Atomic Energy Agency found that Canada has a comprehensive framework for nuclear and radiation safety covering current facilities and activities. It also noted that the CNSC strives to continuously upgrade its regulatory framework to address new challenges in relation to upcoming technologies such as small modular reactors. Our commitment to continuous improvement includes ensuring a strong radioactive waste policy is in place that further provides Canadians with confidence in the long-term management for all of Canada's radioactive waste. The government is evaluating Canada's current radioactive waste policy, and we're developing a comprehensive new policy to ensure we continue to have a strong foundation for the ongoing use of nuclear energy. That's why we launched an inclusive engagement process to develop a modernized policy for radioactive waste management and decommissioning, including any waste from future technologies such as small modular reactors. From November 2020 to May 2021, we met with and received written feedback from Indigenous peoples, public interest groups, waste producers and owners, other levels of government, and other interested Canadians on how they would like to see our radioactive waste policy modernized. From that feedback on February 1st, so just about a month ago, we released a draft policy for radioactive waste management and decommissioning with a 60-day public comment period. We're seeking written feedback until April 2nd from the public on this draft policy, which we then plan to finalize before the end of the year. Our goal is to inform a modernized radioactive waste policy that continues to meet international standards based on best available science and that reflects the values and principles of Canadians, including our Indigenous peoples. I'm really pleased to be here tonight and to be joined this evening by Jim Delaney and Justin Hanna, directors from our nuclear group, and we welcome any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we'll go to questions. We have Mr. Seaback for 6 minutes, please.
Great, thank you very much. I want to start with the CNSC. How far along in the process are you for finding a host site for the long-term geological repository?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Seaback. Finding a site for long-term fuel depository is not something that's the CNSC's mandate. That is the mandate of the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. What the CNSC's mandate is to do the licensing of that particular facility. And the NWMO did appear before this committee a few weeks ago, and we are expecting them to start their impact assessment. We're expecting them to select a site in 2024 and start an impact assessment after that.
Some of the things that we're discussing at the committee here is whether or not reports should go to, the reporting should be through the Minister of the Environment, through Parliament, through the Ministry of the Environment, as opposed to Parliament through the Minister of Natural Resources. Does the Minister of Natural Resources have any role or decision-making in your organization?
None whatsoever. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, the decisions made by the Commission, which is a quasi-judicial tribunal, can be reviewed only by a federal court. So there is no intervention, no influence by the minister in our decisions. And if you like, I can elaborate further on how that relationship is with NRCan, with other departments, and what the impact of that reporting is.
Please, that was actually my next question.
Okay. So as you rightfully said, we report to Parliament. That is as per our enabling legislation, the Nuclear Safety and Control Act. And the minister, as I said, has no role in our decision making or in our day-to-day operations. The CNSC has horizontal relationships with many departments, including the two witnesses that are following us, the Environment and Climate Change Control Canada, the Impact Assessment Agency, Health Canada, Transport Canada, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, including our provincial agencies, Environment and Labour. And I just want to emphasize that, one of the reasons I've heard in previous appearances is a concern about optics, that NRCan is responsible for promotion, and why would the regulator kind of be reporting to that? But as I've explained, that our reporting is strictly in a way for us to get to Parliament with no political interference in our decision making. And we did some public polling in 2020, where we reached out to Canadians, to civil society organizations, licensees, host communities, scientists, interveners, because we were trying to get a baseline on Canadians' confidence and trust in the regulator. And the reporting relationship was never raised by an issue by anyone. And similar, the international review that was done in 2019 never raised our reporting as a concern around our independence or compromising it in any way. I've been a commission member and a president, for 11 years. Whichever minister we report to, that's a decision of the governor in council. I can't see it making any difference in how we carry out our mandate.
Thanks very much. Yes, it does actually. It's very helpful. One of the questions that I asked on Tuesday to our panelists was, does the system work? And, are there any improvements that you can think of that you might suggest? And I'm going to ask you the very same question because I think it's very important.
Okay, thank you. So let me give you the regulator's perspective. The system works, and it works. You just need to look at the track record. There has not been an incident, certainly in the last 20 years since the Nuclear Safety and Control Act has come in place, and could be even longer than that, where waste management has impacted safety or the environment. So the track record speaks for itself. You've heard about the international reviews that have been done that have given us the confirmation on how robust our framework is, how strong the oversight is, how we know so well what the waste is, where the waste is. We've got financial guarantees to make sure that any future liabilities have been looked after. So frankly, if you look at any other industry, any other energy sector, waste is not managed from cradle to grave as well as it has been done in the nuclear sector, which is a very highly regulated sector, and appropriately so. And so if you ask me if there are opportunities for improvement, I think all those are things that are underway right now. Finding long-term solutions for management and disposal of waste is certainly one. And another one that I would want to add is there is public angst around radioactive waste. And I believe the sector needs to do a much better job at listening to what those concerns are and try to address them.
Thank you so
much. But
much.
overall, I think it works well.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Mr. Weiler now. No, I'm sorry. Okay, Mr. Oh, I'm sorry. I've got the wrong page. Mr. Longfield. This double-sided really gets to you after.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to start with Ms. Velshi. And first of all, thank you for your years of service in the role that you're fulfilling. As a party to the International Atomic Energy Agency's Joint Convention on the Safety of Spent Fuel Management, on the safety of radioactive waste management, we have to do this comprehensive review that we've just done, April 2021, on our waste management governance.
Est-ce que c'est possible que M. Longfield parle sans son masque parce que pour l'interprète, ça...
Could it be possible that you would take your mask off, please, sir? It's easier for the interpreters to understand.
If I can, and if I haven't lost a lot of time.
We'll start over.
Okay, thank you. As a first time in a committee room in 2 years, I don't know what protocols are sometimes, but as a party of the International Atomic Energy Agency's Joint Convention on the Safety of Spent Fuel Management and on the Safety of Radioactive Waste Management, we have to do this comprehensive review that you've mentioned. The last one was published April 2021. Is this like an audit where there are action items that come from these reviews? Are we meeting our international commitments? Are there any highlights? You've mentioned a few just in the last testimony that you just gave.
Thank you, Mr. Longfield. I'll start answering that question, and then I'll ask Mr. Jamal to add some more details to this. So as part of the convention that we have signed, we do need to report every 3 years on our used fuel and radioactive waste management to this international body of peers. And as you mentioned, the last report was in 2021, though the convention itself, because of the pandemic, got deferred. But it is an opportunity for peers to review our entire management system for waste management in Canada. We get feedback from them, we get questions from them, identify areas for improvement. And in the spirit of transparency, and by the way, this is not just the regulator, it is the entire sector that presents and appears for this convention and peer review, gets presented to the Commission at a public hearing meeting, and the feedback that we get from our peers are posted. So there's great transparency on what we're doing well and what we can do better. But I'll turn to Mr. Jamal, who can probably give you some specific examples of the kind of feedback we have got and actions we have taken as a result. So to Mr.
If I
Jamal,
could have
please.
that in maybe 20 seconds, if possible. I have another question to ask another witness. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Velshi. In 20 seconds, the process of the joint convention is established, quote unquote, in accordance to a treaty. We call it a convention, but it is a treaty under the UN. The process is very much formalized. And you ask a question about, do we ask about what we call area of improvements? It comes out as challenges. At the same time, Canada receives, and the CNSC practically, at the last review of the convention, we received good practices and areas for improvements, and we are legally bound to respond to them for the next meeting. These actions, not up to us to say it's closed. The peer review process mentioned by the president determined the closure and the adequacy of the closure of these challenges.
Thank you. And this study is on governance, and you've just described the governance right there, so we could probably close our study. No, I'm just kidding. But it is very important to know that it's an independent governance and that it's not politically interfered with and that it's peer-reviewed from international bodies. So thank you for that, for our reporting. And speaking of our reporting, if I could go over to Ms. Johnston, when we're looking at the review that you're doing sounds very similar to the review that we're doing. Parliamentarians can get in witnesses, but I'm certain that the review that we're doing isn't going to be as thorough as what you're in the process of with the 60-day comment period coming back. Is there anything our report could add to the review you're doing? Is this report that we're working on something that would be of value to you? Is there anything in particular you'd like us to, I can't ask you to write our report, but is there an area of concern that we should make sure we cover in our report?
Thank you very much for the question. Ultimately, what we want to ensure is that Canadians see themselves in the policy and the work that they're doing. And so I think to the questions that you're exploring and equally the questions that we're exploring is how can we ensure that, you know, the three elements that we've got in the draft policy that really set out the vision and the federal commitments of health, safety, security, protection of the environment, openness, transparency, and public engagement, and then global excellence in the fields of radioactive waste management and decommissioning, to ensure that those are the principles that are being captured in the work that they're doing, and that we're able to hold the trust and sustain the long-term trust as we're moving forward. My hope is that that the work is complementary, and that it can be additive to the work that we're doing.
And building trust seems to be one of the major themes, because we had a lot of conflicting testimony. I'm certain that you probably would have experienced some of the same.
So I would say we've heard a lot of things. We've heard about sort of the role that nuclear can play in Canada's energy mix. We've heard different perspectives and interests of Indigenous people, the importance of setting measurable policy goals. And so, I think, if you read the reports all the reports are on our website right now, they do show two sides or a spectrum of perspectives when you look at the issue, and I think that demonstrates sort of that there's no monolith or no single view on these matters.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Longfield. Madame Posey.
Oui, merci. Alors, ma question s'adresserait à Madame Velshi. La Commission canadienne, on va s'entendre là-dessus, ça protège les citoyens et l'environnement. Je m'excuse, mais il y a quelqu'un qui parle aussi dans mon...
Hey, point of...
Please go ahead. Can you hear me in English, those who are listening in English? Yes? Okay, we'll begin over again. My question is addressed to Ms. Velshi. We know that the Canadian Commission is there to protect the citizens, the environment. In your introduction, you indicated that it is very security, safety above all is what you said. I believe you, but I have certain concerns that I'd like to discuss with you. First of all, the small modular reactors were dismissed, and there was a Rolfton area where there was going to be some storage, long-term storage, and you should inform the population. It's important to you. You said transparency. The cobalt-60 spent and where they are stored in Canada for imported sources of cobalt. Now, I'm sure that safety is very important, first and foremost, but how would you respond to these critiques?
Let me just make sure I have understood your questions correctly. So one, and maybe I'll start at the last one, was about cobalt-60 imports and how do we ensure safety about that. You mentioned about Douglas Point, I believe, and then you also mentioned something about SMRs, but I'm not quite sure what the question was on that. If I can ask you to repeat that, please.
Oui, bien sûr. Alors, c'est que la Commission...
Certainly. The Commission was quite militant in excluding SMRs from environmental impact studies. So when we think about public safety, I feel that this is an oversight.
With that last one around the impact assessment and which projects go under an impact assessment or they don't meet the threshold and then are reviewed by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission under our Nuclear Safety and Control Act.
Je vais vous interrompre 2 secondes parce que je n'ai pas la traduction.
Is it? Are we back on?
Ah oui, là ça fonctionne, merci.
Okay, allez-y.
Alors,
Okay. So the question around why SMRs don't undergo an impact assessment, there's a threshold that's been established based on the risk level, and perhaps a question better asked to the impact assessment agency. It's not the CNSC being militant about it. This is part of the Impact Assessment Act and the project that's in there. What I do want to reassure you, and I would want to reassure Canadians, that whether a project is reviewed under the Impact Assessment Act or by the CNSC,
je vais vous arrêter.
the level...
Madame Velshi, je vais vous...
I'm going to interrupt you there because time is flying by, and you're speaking of reassuring us and our Canadians, but you have not made public the waste criteria. People want to see what the revised version of this policy is, the revised waste criteria. We believe that this document should be incorporated into the evaluation impact studies because it deals with waste, but it has not been made public. So how can you improve if you want to listen to the Canadians and to upgrade and modernize your process?
Asking about, those are in our regulatory documents. We specify what the waste criteria are, what the classification is. It's consistent with international standards, and that is public. So again, Madame Posey, I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what exact issue you are raising. I will ask my colleagues, maybe Ms. Muthi has a better insight into what issue you're getting at. Ms. Muthi?
Thank you. So the question is about waste classification and regulatory documents. Then
sur la version révisée, pas sur l'ancienne version.
The revised version. We've had witnesses that wanted to participate in consultations, and they requested the documentation, but they did not get it.
Clear to me what documents you're referring to, Madam Posey. So respectfully, if you can send us a list of the documents that were not provided, we can provide them, but I can assure you that all of the waste regulatory
Je
documents...
parle d'un seul document, madame.
Only one document in question here. Waste acceptance criteria. Latest version, the revised version, and the public has not had access to that.
Est-ce que je peux prendre la réponse, Monsieur le Président?
May I endeavor an answer, Mr. Chairman? Go ahead. Yes, go ahead, sir. Thank you, Madam, for your question. All the documents are in fact all available, and consultations have already underway with the Commission. So what has occurred in consultation has been made public, and everything is available on our website. If you're looking for a particular document, I would be very pleased to provide you with it in writing for the committee. I imagine my 6 minutes is over. Well, I'm afraid so, but 15 seconds because there's been some choppy transfers here. Well, the comment is I know several groups, community groups, who wanted to see a revised version of the waste acceptance criteria, and they were unable to obtain it. Okay, very well, it's noted. Ms. Collins, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to start by saying that it's disappointing that neither the Natural Resource Minister nor the Minister of Environment could make time to appear at our committee, especially since this is such an important topic. But I think maybe my first question is around the CNSC. So the CNSC is nearing the conclusion of its environmental assessment of CNL's proposed near-surface disposal facility at Chalk River, and CNSC staff recently recommended approval, and the first of 2 licensing hearings has taken place. Is there any input that could be received at these public hearings that might lead the CNSC to decide not to proceed with the project, or has the decision effectively been made?
So, Ms. Collins, thank you very much for that question. And while, as you rightfully identified, this is a matter in front of the Commission, and it would not be appropriate for me to give you details around the particular application.
I don't need details, just
right.
Because we've got such a
but
short
your
time,
question,
just really
right,
around the question.
So interventions are due by middle of April. So yes, Commission for its Part 2 hearing that starts on end of May. That's when we're going to be listening to the interventions and then make a decision only after we've heard all those different perspectives. So absolutely no decision has been made. That's why it's a two-part hearing to allow interveners to submit.
The Keboek First Nation has asked that the hearings be halted until a consultation framework between them and the CNSC is in place. This has been a long-standing request. Can you talk a little bit about why this request has not been met when reconciliation and meaningful consultation must be the starting point for any government decision that affects Indigenous peoples' lands and rights?
And Ms. Collins, I think you got a copy of the Commission's decision on that request that we got for an adjournment. And as you would have read in that decision or in that letter from the registrar, is that it is part of the Commission proceeding to see the level of engagement that has happened and whether it has been adequate to meet the honor of the Crown. So that is part of the hearing, and that decision was made consistent with the rules of the Commission's proceedings.
Now, the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development is going to be tabling an audit report on nuclear waste management later this year. These audits typically involve the investment of several years of investigation and research. Wouldn't it make more sense to consider the audit's findings before making important decisions related to the disposal of radioactive waste, particularly at the facility at Chalk River? And wouldn't there be a missed opportunity to incorporate lessons learned and best practices going ahead?
So, Ms. Collins, that audit is underway. And as you know, the CNSC is one of the three parties that's being reviewed. But the audit scope does not look at the Commission proceeding side of things, whether it's around our hearing process or the decision-making process. The focus is very much around our oversight and enforcement. So it's, the Auditor General knows about the hearing and around the timeline for the decision. They've indicated no concerns with that. And so any improvement that they identify will absolutely be taken into consideration, but it will be very much around that.
If the Commission approves CNL's proposal, would that set any precedents for future nuclear waste disposal projects?
So if the question is if this particular application is accepted or denied, does that mean any other nuclear surface disposal facility?
Does it set any precedents?
No, each application is assessed on its own merit.
Thank you so much. So in 2021, the City of Ottawa passed a resolution urging the CNSC and CNL to stop importing radioactive waste from other provinces to Chalk River, to increase safeguards, to protect the Ottawa River during site demolition and waste transfer activities, and to prevent precipitation from entering the near surface disposal facility. Can you explain what actions have been taken to address these concerns?
So when it comes to imported waste, from the CNSC's perspective, we make no distinction on whether the waste is domestic or imported. It just needs to be managed safely. The question around, a decision on whether import of radioactive waste should be allowed is more a policy decision. So maybe you want to ask Ms.
I hear that. Thank you. And in terms of the safeguards? To protect the Ottawa River?
And maybe I'll turn to Mr. Jamal to give you a detailed response to that.
Great. And if you could keep it just to 30 seconds or less.
The protection of the environment is key for every assessment and oversight. It doesn't matter if the material is being transported or not. The question being safeguard, again, there is obligation under the IEA for safeguarding of material. If that's the question, IEA inspectors come to sites in Canada and verify the safeguard with respect to inventory. Safeguarding the environment is our priority, if that was the question. And there are 1 million of packages being transported around the world, and over 1 million on a yearly basis in Canada. And the protection of the environment is inherent to the design of the packaging.
Thank you. We'll
sure.
go to Mr. Mazier now.
Oh.
Sorry, Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. So the Safety Commission, has the transportation of nuclear waste resulted in any radioactive incidents in Canadian history?
So, Mr. Mazier, the transportation has got an impeccable record. Over 60 years of transportation, Mr. Jamal just said, both globally, over 10 million packages a year, in Canada, over 1 million a year, and there has not been an incident that has impacted the environment or the safety of individuals.
Excellent. Very safe transportation. How many civilians have been harmed by nuclear waste in Canada?
0.
Wow, that's good. How much has the government invested in research and development in reusing and recycling spent nuclear fuel?
It's not a question that I can answer. Maybe Ms. Johnston can answer that. It's not something that the regulator has knowledge of.
I don't have a number off the top of my head, but it's something that we can take a look at and get back to the committee.
Perfect. Yes, if you could forward those on, that'd be great. NRCan, it's clear from previous witness testimony that SMRs are a major opportunity in addressing climate change. Is the disposal of SMR waste different than standard nuclear waste disposal? And if so, will the government be presenting a specific plan for disposal of SMR waste? So anybody can.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm going to ask Mr. Hanna just to speak about SMR waste or SMRs and the waste that they produce, and then Mr. Delaney type disposal side.
Someone's on mute there.
Yeah, someone's on mute.
Hannah?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
So there are a number of technologies that are currently being considered for deployment in Canada. They do have a number of various characteristics that will be considered as part of their waste disposal processes. Currently within the SMR action plan and in consultations with industry, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization is working with various developers to understand their waste, to invest in the R&D required to contain, manage, and safely dispose of this waste. But in the fullness of time, it will take a number of years to decide in the end what waste will be used for SMR deployment in Canada. It is still not determined of the multiple technologies that are being deployed in Canada, which ones will actually be built and which ones will produce waste that will ultimately be put in the final waste repository.
And any other comments?
I'll just jump in as well. Just to build on what Justin had mentioned as well. So under the Nuclear Fuel Waste Act, they would be responsible for management of spent fuel, regardless of whether that's the existing CANDU fuel or SMR waste down the road. And I know that there was a question about the funding. I know there was some funding to the Moltex project through ICED's program. And some of that funding as well is to actually do the research to better understand the waste streams that would come.
Do you get those numbers? I guess they'll come forward to the committee if you can get a hold of how much money was actually spent on the research for it so far. Would that be possible, Mr. Delaney?
Yes, we can come up with the values for sure.
Yeah. So it's really, I guess it's very much the SMR research is very much in the infancy of trying to find out what we're going to do with the waste and even what kind of waste is going on there. So everybody, the industry is generally looking at it. So that's good. Back to safety. If no community agrees to be the host of DGRs, what is the government's plan for storing high-level radioactive waste?
Thank you for the question. So to note that, the adaptive management process, adaptive phased management process, just to get the right words, has been underway since it was adopted in 2007. But ultimately, if a communities decide that they do not want to take that on, and the decision, as Ms. Velshi noted, was for 2023, then it will continue to be stored in the interim facilities as it is done right now.
10 seconds, Mr. Mazier.
Any other? So, I guess there is no plan. If these communities don't decide not to take it, there is no plan, really. It'll just keep on being stored on the surface, or we'll be right back to where we started from, basically, or is there a plan B?
Yes or no, please?
Mr. Delaney?
I'll jump in really quickly. I would just say that the NWMO would continue to work with Canadians to decide the best path forward for that waste disposal.
Thanks very much. Okay,
Thank you.
We'll go to Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Thank you very much. Just following up on Dan Mazur's question. And first, let me start by thanking the witnesses for being here this evening. And I would, in particular, like to recognize the work that Ms. Velshi has done with women in STEM as well, and the support she's given to that important area. And I'm just wondering on the issue of the deep geological storage site. If indeed there isn't one, there's no community that is found to host this site, what impact do you think that would have on future nuclear energy sites in Canada?
Jim, do you want to jump in?
Sorry, yeah, I can jump in. I guess I would reiterate as well that the NWMO will continue to work to identify an informed and willing host community for the disposal of that radioactive waste. So the process itself would continue on. It would just mean either re-engaging with some of the communities that it's already engaged with, or going back and identifying other communities that may be an informed and willing host community.
Thank you. But would that in any way give you pause in thinking about small modular reactors or new nuclear facilities if indeed there's no community that has stepped forward or agreed to host a deep geological repository, given that it seems that there's not really a plan B right now in terms of dealing with the long-term storage of this waste?
So, Ms. Taylor-Roy, maybe I can just give you the regulator's perspective on this. As you've heard many times, the used fuel waste is stored safely and can be stored in the same manner for decades, while the NWMO, I guess, restarts their process to find a willing host community. So it's not, from a regulator's perspective, that's not a prerequisite for nuclear generation. And I do want to thank you for acknowledging my work on women in STEM. Thank you.
You're welcome. So then if the need for a deep geological repository, you're saying that the waste can be safely stored without it, why are we searching for one?
So maybe just to begin, I mean, when we look at the best practices internationally, the Deep Geological Repository has been identified as a best practice across international standards. And so it is the approach that had been agreed to, as I noted, in 2007. So that was the adaptive phase management approach. The NWMO has been doing this work with communities in a way that is sort of, and they were here before you previously, identifying a number of communities who may be willing partners, identifying both the opportunities, the risks, the benefits, and then and also the financial benefits that would come along with being a host community, and then really identifying it down to the communities who wish to be that host.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I understand the process. I was just wondering what if this. So this is just a best practice. You're saying Canada doesn't have to adopt this best practice if in fact there's not a community that is willing.
So at this point, there are two communities that have identified that are still interested in becoming a host community.
Yeah. No, I'm just asking in the eventuality that since we don't have one right now, I was curious. But that kind of also goes to a question I have about the approval of CNL's proposal to build and operate the engine tier containment mount at Chalk River. I was just wondering, in terms of our study, whether having gone through this process and nearing a final decision, whether there are any kind of lessons learned or reflections on how you would deal with another approval like of this sort, or perhaps applying it to the Deep Geological Repository, the community involvement, the engagement with Indigenous groups, et cetera. Do either of you have any recommendations for us in terms of how these consultations should be handled, given what you've learned from this experience at Chalk River?
We have 30 seconds.
So maybe I'll start, and Ms. Johnson can go after. So we're constantly learning. Certainly around reconciliation, it's a journey, so I know the next time around we will maybe start a lot earlier, engage much further, and be just better partners in this, and have stronger relationships that have been established. All I can say is we're constantly improving.
Merci. Madame Posé, 2 minutes et demie.
Alors,
Yes, thank you. I have a question for Mr. Jamal. He told us to send us to his website. Perhaps the waste acceptance criteria for Cross River could be sent to our clerk. This is very close to the surface. We don't want the older version. We would like the newer version, the most recent version. Now, to NRCan representatives, Ms. Johnson, we have our committee, which is trying to take a look at the process going through. The department is revising the policy framework, or the framework policy, I should say, for waste management, nuclear waste management. The Auditor General's office, by way of the commissioners, preparing a report, and yet the Canadian Commission is already looking at some consultations, or hearings, I should say, as to these sites in Chalk River. And also the Rolston unit has been mothballed. Should we not suspend these projects, which are not yet licensed, until we get results from the Auditor General's office and others who are inquiring currently, just out of courtesy? Then we can take decisions on how to store permanently, hopefully, nuclear waste.
So on this issue, there are a number of times that the federal government undertakes reviews and at the same time has the obligation to continue to undertake its responsibilities and manage the business in front of it. And this is one of those cases. So, our perspective on this is that the policy will continue to move forward. We are, as the CNSC and others, are subject to the performance audit of the CESD, and when those results are available, and the review is complete, that will put us in a position to make the adjustments at that time.
Commentaire de 10 secondes, Madame Posé.
Il faudrait tenir compte.
Yes, but you'll have to take into consideration the work that we're doing here, serious work, and that of the Auditor General and the Environment Commissioner. I'd look for another document as well, if I could. I'd like an answer to the following question. How much money are we making from the import of nuclear waste? What kind of profits do we have from that?
Not aware of profits that we're making.
We have to go to Ms. Collins right now. That was the 2.5 minutes that Madame Posé had, even more than 2.5 minutes. So maybe you could work that answer into at another time. But we go to Ms. Collins now for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And maybe we could get that in writing from the department. I also had mentioned in my previous comments just about the City of Ottawa's resolution and the safeguards to protect. I didn't actually hear about any additional actions that have been taken. So if there are any additional actions that have been taken since that resolution, I'd love if witnesses could follow up in writing to our committee. One essential for small nuclear reactors, reprocessing waste. Dr. Mana stated reprocessing waste makes little difference to the long-term management of nuclear waste while making nuclear weapons proliferation easier. He mentioned that Canada shared technology in the past with other countries who then used it in their nuclear weapons programs, and especially given Putin's recent threats of nuclear warfare, this is a deep concern. So to any of the witnesses, just wanted some, if you are thinking through how our waste, how technological developments around smaller nuclear reactors and waste, how we can mitigate the threat of nuclear proliferation weapons.
Perfect. So maybe just to start, I mean, Canada remains committed to the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, and the full implementation of all of the safeguards from the IAEA, and that's the safety and those agreements that we are party to are primary. There are SMR technologies that do look at reprocessing, but as we have mentioned earlier, those are under development, and none of that would overtake the agreements that we have.
On mute, Ms. Collins. Ms. Collins, you're on mute.
So sorry, thank you. And you mentioned the International Atomic Energy Agency's integrated, or they have an integrated regulatory review service, peer review of Canada's radioactive waste policies in 2019. They found that the government should enhance the policy and strategy for radioactive waste management, and that the CNSC should consider better aligning its radiation protection requirements with IAEA safety standards. Can you speak to that and how those concerns have been addressed?
In 15 seconds, please.
With respect to the part that we are accountable for, the policy review, we're in the process of doing that work now. The IAEA will be back in 2023, and we look forward to being able to talk to them about the work that we have done.
Perfect. Mr. Dreesen for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the witnesses for being here today. Ms. Velshi, you had mentioned that the CNSC framework was also aligned with international standards and best practices, and of course we had testimony from Mr. DeMarker saying that the International Energy Agency had wrote that a country report for Canada that encouraged Canada to help the rest of the world pursue nuclear through both SMRs and CANDU technology, because they see Canada as a Tier 1 nuclear nation. And so I guess my question is to you, if you could talk a bit more about where Canada might be able to take the lead on innovation in nuclear energy. I know there was a discussion earlier about the deep geological depositories, and that there are best practices internationally. We've had discussions on glaciation and so on. I know that sounds far-fetched. However, if you're talking about something that's tens of thousands of years down the road, you have to think about that. But I'm just, we've done so many things in Canada that are world-class, whether it be our renewable resources or non-renewable resources. I wonder if you could just speak to where we actually lead in nuclear energy throughout the world.
Thank you very much for that question. And I'll start and I'll get Mr. Jamal to add to it. And maybe I'll just start with SMRs, since your question began with that. And you know that OPG has made a decision on building an SMR at the Darlington site. This is going to be the first grid-level SMR in the Western world, in a G7 country. So Canada is leading that. The CNSC, as the regulator, becomes the lead regulator for this, for the world. And there are other countries who are looking at Canada to see how we are licensing this new technology and how they can benefit from that, how they can piggyback on that. We've got collaboration agreements with the US regulator as well as the UK regulator, so that we can work jointly and share our efforts together. So certainly on the SMR front, we are taking a lead. We invariably get invited to lead many of the international fora on that. And there are many other areas. So maybe I'll ask Mr. Ramsey to give you a couple more examples.
Thank you for your question. The fact that you asked about the lead, at the last RS mission, we did receive good practice. A good practice under the international peer review, and that means other member states should take into consideration the success of the Canadian model from a regulatory perspective. I personally lead many missions internationally as the lead under the IAEA, and I can attest to you that many of the countries that we evaluate look to Canada with respect to our advancement from the regulatory framework and independence of the Commission. We have quite a bit of collaboration internationally, let it be for the existing fleet and for any new innovation that's coming across. So we collaborate As a matter of fact, we have to turn away certain regulators because our capacity is limited. But we take pride of the advances we have in place and will continue to lead. We are the lead regulator of the G7 currently that is evaluating an SMR on Canadian territory. So we do not work in isolation. We work in collaboration internationally and nationally.
Thank you very much. And of course, Ms. Velshi, you'd also mentioned that any type of energy source, you have to be looking at it from cradle to grave and to take a look at the full life cycle. It doesn't matter whether it's solar, wind, hydro, oil and gas. Everybody has to take a look at the realities of the type of energy that they have and what they're going to do with it once it gets to the stage where it has to be repurposed. Just quickly, Ms. Johnson, you had spoken about international standards and the draft policies and where you're going to be. I only have about 30 seconds left, but I wonder if you could fill us in a little bit. You've heard what CNSR has said. If you could just give us a bit of an update.
On the policy?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, so thank you very much. So we launched the revised paper. It is on our website right now. We're really looking to focus around 6 key elements of the policy and provide greater clarity on the elaboration on the roles and responsibilities, the leadership on radioactive waste management, and set out our direction. We want to focus on, I'm going to be fast here, prevention and minimization of waste, that it's managed to protect people and the environment, that we are, underscore our commitment to UNDRIP through waste management, and you're stopping me. Thank you.
Thank you. I hate to do that. It hurts me more than it hurts you, believe me. We'll go to Ms. Thompson.
Thank you. Sorry, I've lost my translator. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. It's been an incredibly interesting study. So much information, so many perspectives, and so I'm really interested to ask fairly straightforward questions, but to whoever wants to jump in and answer, but just the simple questions that I'm still struggling to find some kind of a consensus on. First point is how much radioactive waste do we have in Canada?
Jim, do you want to jump in on that?
Yes, I can jump in. So if we're talking about the different classes of radioactive waste, so we're talking about 12,700 cubic meters of high-level radioactive waste. The vast majority of our radioactive waste in Canada, when you're excluding uranium mines and mills tailings, is low-level radioactive waste. So to break it down in percentages, we have 4.4% of our waste is high-level radioactive waste. About 0.6 or 0.5% is intermediate level waste, and then the remainder is the 99% remaining is the low level radioactive waste. I hope that helps clarify.
It does, thank you. And again, just very straightforward question, and anyone, any of the witnesses who want to answer this, is radioactive waste safely managed in your perspective within Canada?
So maybe I will start and others can jump in after. I believe it is managed extremely well. We've got the best international practices here, and as I said earlier, our track record speaks for itself.
If I may add, Mr. Chair, to Madam Velshi, with respect to our record international peer review, take on from contracting parties, which is the convention and the treaty, learn from Canadian regulatory oversight and the management of the waste. But I would like to inform the committee that the regulatory powers we've got, we shut down facility, we bring them before the commission. Anyone that's not behaving under and meeting our requirements will be shut down their operations and taking licensing actions to make sure that our requirements and safety is maintained at all times.
Thank you. And sort of the lead from that, with the level of governance, oversight, regulatory bodies, why is there still so much of a disconnect in terms of the information around waste management and the perception that around whether the safety of the practices in Canada?
again, maybe I'll start and my colleagues will want to join in. I think there is genuine, real fear. A lot has to do with waste and how maybe the public media may have presented waste, and you just need to look at The Simpsons and you see these cans with green oozy stuff coming out of it. So some of it is that, some is real, and particularly because they say, well, this is tens of thousands of years that this stuff could be around, and that's rightfully scares people. And as I said earlier, I don't think we have done a well enough job in explaining what the risks are and how well it is managed. And even in the worst case scenario, what's the worst that can happen? And, you had an earlier witness who talked about how Mother Earth has actually managed radioactive waste so well. And if the committee has not looked at the Oklo situation in Gabon, where there was a natural fission reactor 2 billion years ago that operated for tens of thousands of years, and that waste from that is still intact, has not moved at all. And so I think the science, the evidence is there that it can be managed well. We just have not been able to do a good job in explaining that.
30 seconds, please, Ms. Thompson.
Thank you. From the department, if I can get this in, or someone from the department, how does the government make the information and decisions about radioactive waste available to Canadians?
Very quickly, please.
Perfect. I would start, but we do have some information like the National Inventory report and other pieces which are available on our website with respect to the radioactive waste review. For example, every submission, summaries, what we heard reports, those are all available, and we'd be happy to provide those links to the committee if that's helpful to navigate through the information. And
thank you very much. This has been an excellent panel, and we've learned a lot, and we've gathered a lot of input for our study. I'd like to thank the panelists for making themselves available in the evening after we had to cancel the meeting about 10 days ago, I guess it was, or 2 weeks ago. And so we'll stop there, we'll pause there, and we'll bring in our new witnesses and continue. We have till 8:30, and then we have to stop because there's a lot of pressure on House resources. Thank you very much again to the witnesses. Malcolm Mikano from the Biktigong Nishnabeg band. We have from the Department of the Environment, Mary Taylor, Director General, Environmental Protection Operations. From the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, we have Steve Chapman, the Director General of National Programs. We have time for 3-minute opening statements. We'll start with yourself, Chief Meccano, for 3 minutes, please. Is Chief Meccano there? He's just muted. Okay, I think you're on mute, Chief.
Yep, the usual muted trick. Miigwech for giving me the opportunity. I'm Chief Duncan Machado from Beatgong Nishnabik. We live in Ontario, Northern Ontario. The issue of the government of Canada delegating the governance and policy making for nuclear waste to the nuclear industry. And I like to put it as putting the fox in charge of the chicken coop. The nuclear industry in Canada has been creating high-level nuclear waste now for approximately 60 years. During that time, the nuclear industry has created somewhere in the order of 3 million used fuel bundles, probably more. These highly radioactive bundles need to be cooled for a period of time in pools of water, which themselves become contaminated. The NWMO, which is the industry-owned organization, has been delegated by the nuclear industry to determine methods to safely store this waste that is created in nuclear reactors. Some of these elements exist nowhere else in the universe, but are created solely in the nuclear reactors. Waste which is toxic and deadly to all forms of life on our planet for thousands of years and hundreds of thousands of years in a lot of cases. The method that the NWMO has chosen to dispose of this deadly waste is to bury the nuclear waste in deep geological repositories. The intent is to at some point then bury that waste and walk away, leaving future generations to deal with the issues and the contamination of their homelands by an industry that cares only about the bottom line. I would like to point out that as a prospector, and I wander around the bush all the time and I study geology, I understand geological processes, and the earth is not static, it's plastic. And over geological time, all rock formations move. These movements will eventually allow the toxic nuclear waste to then leach into the environment. It's not a matter of if it will eventually leach out, but when. What is the legacy that we wish to leave our descendants? A legacy like Chernobyl? Think about that, please. And the Ontario must ensure that they, not the nuclear industry, are in charge of nuclear waste policy and must phase out the production of electricity by nuclear means so that no more of this deadly waste is produced. Attached are numerous resolutions, and you may have that in your files there because I sent them in, passed by the Anishinaabe Nation and other First Nation organizations, including Chiefs of Ontario and AFN, some of which were moved by me and opposing the storing of nuclear waste on their lands and our lands, and opposing the creation of SMNRs and demanding that the nuclear power be phased out.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief Machado. We did receive that. The clerk mentioned to me with the links, and that will be reviewed as input by the analysts for the study, and we'll have time for questions where you can provide supplementary information right after we hear from Ms. Taylor and Mr. Chapman. Again, thank you for being here, Chief Machado. Go ahead, Ms. Taylor.
Good evening. So Environment and Climate Change Canada is the lead federal department for strategic action on a wide range of environmental matters, including action on clean growth and climate change, preventing and managing pollution, conserving nature, and predicting weather and environmental conditions. The department delivers its mandate through various acts and regulations, such as the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, the Pollution Prevention provisions of the Fisheries Act, the Federal Sustainable Development Act, the Species at Risk Act, the Migratory Birds Convention Act, the Canada Wildlife Act, and others. All nuclear waste projects must undergo a regulatory review, as you know, environmental assessment and licensing processes. And as you also know, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission plays an integral role in these activities. Environment and Climate Change Canada is engaged in the review of waste management proposals and technologies as a federal authority under the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act and the Impact Assessment Act, and for other regulatory process under a Memorandum of Understanding with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. For these, the department provides specialist and expert information on environmental matters related to its mandate. We also participate in Federal Nuclear Science and Nuclear and Science Technology Committee that directs research on new technologies and processes for radioactive waste management and monitoring of any discharges to the natural environment. In 2021, Natural Resources Canada launched the review and modernization of Canada's radioactive waste policy from November 2020 to May 2021. The department, together with other federal departments with responsibilities related to radioactive waste, participated in Natural Resources Canada's extensive engagement process that solicited the views and perspectives of Indigenous peoples and interested Canadians on how they would like to see the radioactive waste policy modernized. For the engagement sessions in the radioactive waste policy, Environment and Climate Change Canada was present to listen to concerns raised by stakeholders and to address questions related to its mandate.
Thank you very much, Ms. Taylor. Mr. Chapman, for 3 minutes, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm pleased to be here to speak to you about the role of the Impact Assessment Agency in the lifecycle management of nuclear projects. The Impact Assessment Agency of Canada is a federal body accountable to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and is responsible for implementing the Impact Assessment Act. Impact assessments help project proponents, the public, Indigenous groups, and decision makers understand the possible impacts of proposed projects before they are allowed to proceed. Assessments identify the best ways to avoid or reduce a project's potential negative impacts while increasing the potential positive effects. The Impact Assessment Act and its regulations establish both the legislative basis for impact assessments and serving as a planning tool that takes into consideration both the environment, health, social, and economic effects of major projects. The goal of the impact assessment process is to inform decision makers about the project impacts and ensure the protection of people and the environment. Under the Impact Assessment Act, the Impact Assessment Agency leads and manages the impact assessment process for all federally designated major projects. The physical activity regulations identify the major projects with the greatest potential for adverse effects in areas of federal jurisdiction related to the environment so that they can enter into our impact assessment process. With respect to nuclear projects, the regulations capture proposed new facilities for storing irradiated nuclear fuel or nuclear waste outside of the boundaries of an existing nuclear facility. These regulations also capture projects proposed for the long-term management and disposal of nuclear waste or nuclear fuel or nuclear waste. The regulations capture as well projects relating to the construction, operation, and decommissioning of certain nuclear fission and fusion reactors that meet a specific threshold. Since the coming into force of the Impact Assessment Act in 2019, no designated nuclear projects have yet entered the impact assessment process. Under the Impact Assessment Act, any assessment of a designated project that includes the physical activities regulated by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission must be referred to an independent review panel. This Impact Assessment Agency and the CNSC have signed a memorandum of understanding that outlines how these assessments, referred to as integrated assessments, will be conducted. The intent of this MOU is to facilitate one single comprehensive coordinated process that meets both the requirements of the Impact Assessment Act and the Nuclear Safety and Control Act. In this way, the principle of one project, one assessment is respected, as the assessment process will integrate the licensing requirements of the CNSC into the impact assessment. A review panel is a group of independent experts who are responsible for conducting an impact assessment. Members must have knowledge or experience relative to our project's anticipated effects regarding the interests and concerns of Indigenous peoples of Canada that are relevant to the assessment, and members of that review panel must be also unbiased and free of conflict.
Okay, sorry, we'll have to stop there, Mr. Chapman, but there'll be time for questions. We'll go to Mr. Seaback for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start with some questions for you, Mary. Sorry, Ms. Taylor. I apologize for that. On February 3rd, we heard from the president of the Canadian Nuclear Association, Mr. John Gorman. Mr. Gorman said that clear support from all government policymakers, clear and ongoing repeated acknowledgement that nuclear is not only clean but needed for a net zero future is needed from policymakers. And yet the environment minister seems to not really be able to state his support for the industry. Can you explain why the government is so reluctant to support the industry? I know that's a tough question for you.
Yeah,
but
it is
the
a tough
minister
question. I don't know. I mean, I don't.
The minister isn't. The minister has decided not to appear on this study. So
go ahead, Ms. Taylor.
Je m'excuse, Monsieur le Président. Rappel au règlement.
Oui.
Point of order, please. The question from Mr. Siebers is talking about the nuclear industry. We're looking tonight, we're studying nuclear waste.
I'm, Ms. Taylor, that's maybe not a fair question, so we're not necessarily
I think that is a question.
Pardon?
That is a question. That is a question that is not related to waste and would not be one that I'd be in a position to answer.
Okay, so go ahead, Mr. Seaback. You have another shot at another question.
Okay, well, I might try and come back to that at a later point. One of the things that we're talking about here is should the CNSC report to the Ministry of the Environment as opposed to the Minister of Natural Resources. In your view, is there any through Parliament to the Minister of Natural Resources as opposed to the Minister of the Environment?
That's a decision that's for the government to make, and it's not a decision for us as the public servant to comment on. The structure has been established by the Government of Canada.
Mr. Chapman, would you say that the IAAC is an independent agency that produces objective and accurate reports on the impact of nuclear waste management projects?
So, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we haven't had a nuclear project enter into the impact assessment system. So I can't comment specifically on nuclear projects under the Impact Assessment Act at this point. I would say that the agency reports to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and produces advice based on the best science and evidence available.
And would you say that advice that you provide is free and independent of influence as an independent agency?
The advice that we provide is, as I mentioned, Mr. Chair, is based on the best science and evidence and free of influence, yes.
I'd like to speak with, I apologize if I'm going to pronounce this poorly, Chief Machano, is that the way to pronounce that?
Mishano.
Mishano. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I wanted to, I understand that you have concerns with respect to the storage of nuclear waste, and I can understand that. Do you see that there's any way to store nuclear waste safely, whether that's in, a deep repository or on surface sites as it's being stored now?
I've answered that same question to the NWMO. You stop making it, then we'll talk about how we can store it.
But do you think there is a safe way to store it?
Well, I'm saying you stop making it, and we'll talk about how we can store it.
Okay, so I guess in your view, there's no need for us to continue to use nuclear energy or indeed expand nuclear energy.
There's lots of alternatives. when you look at Northern Ontario, Northern Quebec, Northern Manitoba, you fly over it, all you see is water. And there's a lot of opportunities for hydroelectric power generation in lieu of nuclear energy. I fly over Toronto and I see hundreds and thousands of roofs, and each one of those roofs should have solar panels on them. It would cut the power demand in half. There's alternatives. You don't need to be producing this toxic waste that will be toxic and poisonous to our descendants for hundreds of thousands of years. They're going to have to deal with it. And you look at the amount of waste that we've produced in the last 60 years, what's it going to be like in another 100 years? What's it going to be like in another 500 years? What's it going to be like in 1,000 years? Are we assuming that there's not going to be any people around to deal with that? You know, with First Nations, we talk all the time about taking care of our descendants for 7 generations.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Weiler now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also want to thank our witnesses for joining this evening for this important study. I'd like to start my questioning with Mr. Chapman. You mentioned that there are no active reviews right now being done by the Impact Assessment Agency for nuclear waste projects, but I'm curious, are there any existing assessments that are being done under the precursor, of course, much less robust SIA 2012 Act that, of course, where active reviews were grandfathered when the new Impact Assessment Act came into force?
Mr. Chair, there are active assessments ongoing for nuclear projects under SIA 2012. Yes.
Okay. And are those, at what stage of the reviews are those projects right now?
Because there's at least 7 that I'm aware of, I would have to get back to the committee, Mr. Chair, on the status of each individual assessment.
Okay. We'd appreciate it if you could provide that in writing. You also talked about the physical activities regulations that triggers what projects are subject to review by the IAA. Could you please explain what the thresholds are for nuclear fuel and waste storage, and if that would also capture waste that would be produced at the scale from SMRs?
Mr. Chair, our physical activities regulations are broken down by a type of activity. You will find the sections related to nuclear facilities and the storage of nuclear waste in sections 26 to 29 of that regulation. With respect to, and I believe the question was with respect to the thresholds, each section of that regulation dictates a very specific threshold for various facilities for either production of nuclear energy or the storage. And so if I could ask Mr. Chair just to have some precision on what threshold exactly the committee member would like me to speak to, I can provide that information.
Yeah, well, just for the actual storage for nuclear waste, not for the production, just for storage such that it would trigger an assessment.
Right, and so in section 28, there's a provision for new facility of storage of irradiated nuclear fuel or nuclear waste outside of the licensed boundaries of a nuclear facility. And also a new facility for the long-term storage of disposal of irradiated nuclear waste or nuclear fuel. There's no threshold for that. So long-term storage of nuclear waste or nuclear fuels, an entry for the irradiated nuclear fuel, nuclear waste, sort of temporary or indeterminate storage. If it's outside of a new facility, then it would be captured by our regulation.
Thank you. You also mentioned the principle of one project, one assessment. I was hoping you could explain to this committee how this can be done without sacrificing the rigor of the separate reviews for nuclear waste.
Mr. Chair, because there's under the Nuclear Safety Control Act and the Impact Assessment Act provisions that overlap, we've worked with the Nuclear Safety Commission to establish a memorandum of understanding of how we would conduct an assessment that would both meet the requirements of an Impact Assessment Act and also meet the requirements under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act. We would have an independent review panel appointed. That panel's functions would also cover both the Nuclear Safety and Control Act and Impact Assessment Act. And at the end of the day, that panel would produce a report for the Minister of Environment and Climate Change to make a decision on, and at the same time, that would also allow the Nuclear Safety Commission to use that same report to consider its licensing decisions at the same time.
Thank you very much. I'd like to next turn to Ms. Taylor from ECCC. You mentioned that ECCC has participated in the ongoing review for the modernization of radioactive waste policy, as well as that ECCC participates in the Federal Nuclear Science Technology Committee that's looking at research on new technologies and processes for radioactive waste management. I was hoping you could please give us a synopsis of ECCC's thinking of the risk of discharges to the natural environment from deep geological repositories of nuclear waste.
I think that's, thank you, Mr. Chair. That question, of course, it depends on the circumstances of each project. So when there is a project, we would be looking at the actual local physical characteristics and then providing our advice on discharges. It's very difficult to speak to in generality. Each project has its own location with its own geological formations, with its own information on water, and so there isn't a general answer to that I could provide.
Okay, I'm going to change gears a little bit. One of the acts that was recently tabled in the Senate is a modernization of one of the acts that ECCC is responsible for, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. And of course, this deals with the risk of toxics to humans and to the environment. Has an assessment ever been done for radioactive waste? And if so, was it declared toxic under CEPA?
Briefly, please, 15 seconds.
There has not been an assessment of radionuclides from waste material.
Thank you so much. We'll go to Madame Posey.
Oui, alors j'aimerais.
Yes, I'd like to thank the witnesses who are staying up quite late tonight. My first question would be addressed to you, Chief Mishano. Could you give us an idea of some of the recommendations that were put forward by the various First Nations and presented to various government agencies? What were the results?
Understand the question.
Voulez-vous répéter, Madame?
Alors, je vais répéter, oui.
Yes, certainly. Which resolutions, as presented to government agencies by First Nations, what were they?
Referred to earlier. What kinds of resolutions are they? I think that's the question.
Oh, yeah. The resolutions dealt with a variety of issues. The production and the research going on around SMRs, the handling of waste, and also the production of nuclear waste through nuclear power. And all three of those things, when you look at those resolutions, they're asking to stop all of them.
I believe, Chief Machado, there's at the bottom of your screen you can choose a language, and then you'd get the interpretation.
Yeah, I just turned it on.
Okay, thank you so much. Allez-y, Madame Posey. Vous n'avez pas perdu du temps.
Alors, je continuerai avec vous.
Okay, I'd like to continue offering you a few questions, Chief. What were the results when you offered your resolutions to government agencies, for example? What was their reaction?
Basically direct our leadership at the Anishinaabe Nation, at the Chiefs of Ontario, and at the Assembly of First Nations to deal with those issues with the federal government and the provincial governments. That's what those resolutions do. it gives them the authority to deal with those issues. As far as I'm aware, the Assembly of First Nations, neither Assembly of First Nations or the Chiefs of Ontario or the Anishinaabe Nations, and I believe the Iroquois as well, have not had any results from either the federal government or the provincial government.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. How many Indigenous nations are there in Canada that have appeared and made their concerns known as to the development of these small modular reactors and the waste that these would create throughout Canada?
Well, at the Assembly of First Nations, nationally, there's 600 First Nations. Not all of them are on board with this issue. There's some that oppose, of course, and abstain. At the Ontario level, there's I believe a little over 37 First Nations that have signed on to this resolution, those resolutions. So there's a lot of First Nations in Ontario who oppose DGRs and SMRs and the creation of nuclear waste through nuclear power.
Merci beaucoup, Chef Machineau. Alors,
thank you very much, Chief Machineau. I'd like to ask a few questions of Mr. Chapman now. For the SMRs, they're exempt from the impact analyses. Could there be a possibility of having these impact analyses done anyway, but on a regional basis, perhaps, or under the auspices of an Indigenous community? There are 37 First Nations in Ontario alone. So could we have some regional evaluations or assessments?
In the Impact Assessment Act that allow for the minister to designate individual projects that aren't described in a regulation to enter the impact assessment process. So that is one mechanism the minister has to bring in projects that aren't described in the regulation. Committee member also asked about regional assessments. The minister has the authority under the Impact Assessment Act to look at regional assessments or to create a regional assessment to look at issues that may be clustered in a particular geographic area. For regional assessment to move forward, the minister would take into consideration factors like the influence that regional assessment may have on future projects, the contribution of the regional assessment to get a better understanding of what cumulative effects are under a federal jurisdiction, and whether or not the regional assessment would be in the public interest to move forward.
Il vous reste seulement 10 secondes, Madame Posé.
10 seconds left. Which nuclear projects will fall under the new law? Well, can we get the answer in writing, perhaps? So perhaps a witness can give us a written answer and send this off to the clerk or email. We'll go to Ms. Collins now, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just, since we're starting a new panel, I wanted to mention again that it is disappointing that the Minister of Environment couldn't make time to appear at the committee for this important topic. My first question is for Chief Michano. We've heard a lot from industry representatives who have dismissed social concerns about nuclear waste disposal. Chief Michano, I'd love to hear more about what you're hearing from members of your community and their concerns about nuclear waste.
Yeah. Well, when the NWMO was doing consultations several years ago, we had huge demonstrations out on Highway 17 at White River. We had huge demonstration out in Hornpain. We had huge demonstrations at the Nipigon River Bridge. So the First Nations and our community members were there as well. And they were telling me in no uncertain terms that they didn't want any nuclear waste in our site. On our territory. And in fact, we did a BCR here in the community, and council signed on to that BCR that we didn't want any nuclear waste in our the traditional territory, and we didn't want nuclear waste in Northern Ontario, period. Because of the issues that I've cited. Our First Nations always talk about 7 generations ahead that you have to think of, you have to plan for. And if you're leaving that toxic waste in the ground and then walking away from it, you're not thinking about those 7 generations. You're leaving that waste for them to deal with. It needs to stop being produced. That's the answer.
You're on mute.
My apologies. Given that your territories are on unceded lands, do you feel that you've received undue pressure from the nuclear industry to become a community host of nuclear waste?
No, I don't think so. I think they understood that we, at least at Big Tigong, we're not going to do it, and we also didn't accept any of their money. We told them to, well, I'm not going to say anything about where we told them to put it, but we didn't want their money because we looked at that as bribe money. And that's what we called it. But anyways, the pressure wasn't there because they knew that we were not going to do it, and eventually they just walked away.
Okay. Do you think there are ways that the NWO or federal agencies can improve their relationship with your community?
Not with my community, I don't think. With maybe some other communities, but as we can see through their facade.
And so Indigenous peoples must be consulted in selecting sites. How would you characterize the consultations related to the nuclear waste management? And do you think that the kind of manner and the timeline determined in those consultations were determined by Indigenous peoples? Do you feel like Indigenous knowledge was valued in the process?
No, I wish Chief Closest was here from Hornpain, because they tried to be involved with the process there in Hornpain, and they were shut out of meetings. And a lot of those meetings basically talked about the benefits of nuclear power, and nothing about any of the negative impacts that could be there. So it was all one-sided. The messaging was all one-sided. And the Hornpain First Nation people were not even allowed in the room in those meetings.
Given that Indigenous communities were shut out of those rooms and the kind of one-sided piece that you just mentioned, do you feel like the NWMO has infringed upon Indigenous rights to self-determination?
I believe so. In regards to the treaty, the people who signed on to treaties, I believe they have. With us, we are unceded territory. We have an Aboriginal title claim in place. And I believe they understood that as well when they were talking to us, and that we weren't going to back down. We were all set to put cabins out in the middle of those sites and not let them drill.
Thank you so much, Chief Michano. I do also have some questions for the impact assessment.
Oh.
Okay. Maybe just as a precursor to my next question, because I'll only have 2.5 minutes, the City of Ottawa has called for a regional assessment of radioactive disposal projects in the Ottawa Valley under the Impact Assessment Act, but the request was turned down by the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. I was hoping the Minister would be here to answer this question directly, but since he's not here, for my next questions, I'll be asking about why the request for a regional assessment was turned down, given what clearly seemed to be regional impacts.
Okay. So we do have to finish at 8:30. So I'm going to have to shave a little time off the questions in the next round. I'll do 4, 4, 2, 2, 4, 4 instead of the 5, 2.5. So we'll start with Mr. Dreeshen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly I know how disconcerting it is when nuclear radiation. I remember as a child, my dad had the job of the Geiger counter to go out to see if after the Cuban Missile Crisis, whether or not we would be able to get back out into the communities. We've seen that as a scare when I was a kid. We've seen other types of things, acid rain, global cooling, global warming, Y2K, ozone depletion, lots of things that need to have our attention and have had that over the years. And, so I think that's really important. But there is I suppose, a little bit of a disconnect in we do have the Department of the Environment that talks about all the needs for the different things to be dealt with and dealt with properly. But the Impact Assessment Agency, we haven't really done a nuclear projects analysis. So I guess where I'd like to go with my question, and I realize I'm short up in my time, but where I'd like to go with my question, it doesn't really matter what type of energy source that we have. If it's flooded lands from hydro, if it's oil and gas well sites, if it's solar, the sand that you need to dig out of the ground, and the all of the toxic materials that are with those, windmill sites, biomass, everything is going to have some sort of impact on our society. And of course, nuclear waste is like that. So I'm curious, perhaps, Mr. Chapman, how do you think the processes that we have used to analyze the full life cycles and the cradle to grave assessments for those other types of energy sources will be used in order to properly analyze nuclear projects when the time comes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Impact Assessment Agency has learned a lot over time about how assessments should be conducted from an administration standpoint and also from a science standpoint. And so we would expect to bring the sort of the learning that we've done for those individual assessments to bear when we look at future nuclear projects entering into our system. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, because of the way that we structured ourselves with the Memorandum of Understanding with the Nuclear Safety Commission, we'll be doing that jointly with the Nuclear Safety Commission.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps if I could speak to Ms. Taylor on that. In the Department of Environment, what is the education process, and do you have any responsibility there to educate Canadians? I know that we did have some discussion with a professor from the University of Calgary talking about how this can be done. Is that part of the programs that you have in order to make sure that people understand exactly what the concerns really are in this case?
I would say we don't have outright education programs, but we do provide on every project that is in process. We review every proponent's project, and we provide our specialists and expert advice on a range of issues on how the proponent has characterized the effects to water, to air, to biodiversity, including species at risk. And in that way, we look at each project and provide that expert advice.
Okay. Thank you. And I see my time is
Thanks. Appreciate that,
so
Mr. Dreeshen. I appreciate getting that a little extra time back. So, Mr. Duguid, for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for their presentations and answering our questions today. And perhaps this first question to Ms. Taylor. We have two reviews going on at the same time. We've got the review of SEPA, of course, which is in the Senate, will come to us
hopefully sometime in the not too distant future, and a review of radioactive waste policy. I wonder if you have any reflections on those, how those two reviews can inform one another and provide some sage advice that helps decision makers move forward with both of those policy reviews and result in policy improvements.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think I actually have a lot to contribute in terms of how those two reviews can inform each other. I am not actually involved in the SEPA review. I think certainly, we are participating and providing our advice, as I said, on waste review in terms of how we proceed on assessments and the advice that we have and how we work on water quality, water quantity issues, among others, and biodiversity issues. But how those two would inform each other, I do not have anything else that can.
Well, since we're involved in both, we may have an answer to that at the end of our study. To Mr. Chapman, again, if you could refresh our memories, there are no major nuclear facilities, waste management facilities that are under review under the 2019 policy. If there were one, could you just refresh our memories on what the differences would be? I know there's the one project, one process, of course, approach, which was the centerpiece of the 2019 policy. And maybe comment a little bit on our processes, particularly with respect to Indigenous communities. Section 35, we've now have, of course, UNDRIP, which is a government policy. In the time I have, maybe some reflections on the impact assessment project process as it has evolved from 2012.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. There's a number of differences that come into play with the new Impact Assessment Act, both in how we look at projects at the beginning. We have a new planning process, so we have a nuclear project that meets the requirements of regulation. It would go into a planning process where we would sit down with Indigenous groups, talk about what needs to be assessed, should it be assessed, and then a decision is made early in the planning process as to whether a formal impact assessment is required for the project. Once we're out of the planning process, we'd be looking at a variety of new factors that weren't contained in our formal legislation. We'd be looking at impacts on constitutional rights held by Indigenous peoples. We're also looking at new health, social, and economic factors that weren't contained in the formal legislation. The end of the process is also quite different compared to SIA 2012. We now have, under the Impact Assessment Act, a public interest decision that didn't exist under SIA 2012. So either the Minister of Environment and Climate Change can make a public interest decision, or he can refer that decision to the Governor and Council. So very different from a front, middle, and end.
Thank you very much. Madame Posé pour 2 minutes.
Merci. Alors, ma question s'adresserait à Madame.
Thank you. My question is addressed to Ms. Taylor. In the specific case of a near surface at Chalk River and a facility, you're going to be putting down this material, this waste, very close to a water body, and will possibly contaminate the waterway, which goes into Montreal for our drinking water. Now, it also is sited near Indigenous sites. The material has not been identified, but I believe that this runs counter. It wasn't consulted. Could we have some evidence that you're following through with process, that you're going to take into consideration all sources of cobalt-60 in particular at Chalk River? Will it be stored there?
Chair, this particular project is currently under a licensing, under a impact assessment review by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. We are providing our expertise, and our information is available publicly at the website, but it is currently under regulatory review, and the CNSC will conduct the consultations and will do that work. We will provide our expert advice.
Ma dernière question, je pense, irait.
My last question will be for Mr. Chapman. These waste storage sites for medium and high intensity waste, will they be subject to an impact evaluation?
Mentioned to previous committee responses, the regulations dictate the type of nuclear activity or project that we would be assessing. And so when it comes to the storage of nuclear waste, Section 28 of our physical activities regulations lay out which of those types of projects that would automatically be brought into the Impact Assessment Act.
We have to stop there.
Very brief.
We have to there and go to Ms. Collins. Thank you, Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to return to my question for the impact, request for a regional assessment was turned down, given what clearly seems to be regional impacts.
Yes, the request came from Mayor Jim Watson, City of Ottawa. The minister, in making public his reasons for decision, cited the fact that in making the original request for regional assessment, there was reference made to the individual projects that are taking place and currently being assessed by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. That process under CIA 2012 involves an examination of the cumulative effects of each project. And because there's a very robust regime in place under CIA 2012 and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Act to look at cumulative effects, the minister relied on that in making a determination that there would not be value added in a regional assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Do you think that the switch to doing impact assessment under the Impact Assessment Agency makes for a more robust process?
I do. I think that
I'm just going to pause you there. And so, if the Chalk River project were to start today, the Impact Assessment Agency, not the CNSC, would conduct the assessment. So really, wouldn't public confidence be increased about the proposed disposal site, given that there's a more robust project or process available?
I think the public should have confidence in the assessments the Nuclear Safety Commission are undertaking. I have no reason to doubt that those are not robust assessments.
But the Impact Assessment Agency is a more robust process that we're now moving to.
I would say that, as I mentioned, Mr. Chair, in my previous answers, we've learned a lot about individual assessments, and we would use the Impact Assessment Act to look at future nuclear projects, but the fact that Chalk River is undergoing an assessment under CIA 2012 is something that I can't change.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mazier. We're done. Our 2 minutes are up, unfortunately. Ms.
Thank
Collins.
you, Mr.
Mr. Mazier, for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Taylor, do you have confidence in your colleagues at NRCan and at the CNSC to independently govern nuclear waste management in Canada?
I have every confidence in them. We will continue to provide our advice and expertise, and they are charged to do that work.
Good. Mr. Chapman, this committee has heard a lot about the dangers that misconceptions, misplaced fears, and misinformation relating to nuclear energy can have on industry growth and in preventing environmental targets from being reached. From a regulatory and consultation perspective, how do you deal with people and organizations who raise concerns that are fueled by misinformation and fear that contradicts science of nuclear energy and waste?
Mr. Chair, the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada reviews some of the most controversial and polarizing projects that Canada has to offer. And the public, one of our hallmarks of our process is the transparency in our process and our allowance for those views to come forward. It's really up to, in the case of the agency, when we're conducting an assessment or a review panel, to place the appropriate weight on the information or evidence that they gather. It's a form, we provide forms for discourse, for understanding, and for resolution of some of these issues as they come forward.
So can you explain the weighting a little bit more? Like, say if it's a very hot topic, obviously there'd be, did the public know that? Do the organizations know that weighting before they go in?
Do they know that? I think it's one of the jobs of the agency or review panel to explain the process, that's going to be applied to an individual project each time we harmonize, say, with another provincial jurisdiction, or we're working with an Indigenous group. There might be differences in the process. So it's one of the jobs that we have, is to explain the process up front once we have a project come in. Yes, I do think the public understands about how information is treated. It's one of the hallmarks of the Impact Assessment Act. For many of the decisions that the agency makes or the minister makes, there has to be a reasons for decision. And in those reasons for decision, the public can see how information was treated and where reliance was put on certain types of information to arrive at a decision.
So those goalposts could move project to project, like depending what information is found. But okay, well that's good. Ms. Taylor, how much is your department spending on educational initiatives to inform Canadians on safety of nuclear energy?
I would have to look into that. We don't. I'm not aware of any educational programs at this point in time, but to be certain, I would have to take that question and come back.
Okay. And then back to Mr. Chapman. From all the data, research, and scientific evidence you've seen, are DGRs the safest way of storing high-level nuclear waste?
Mr. Chair, because we haven't assessed and arrived at a decision either under the CIA 2012 or what was in a low level and intermediate level DGR, and we haven't had a new application come forward for another DGR, I can't comment on that. What I can comment on is the robustness of both the process the Impact Assessment Agency has and also the Nuclear Safety Commission has to review these types of projects.
Thank you. Mr. Longfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to start with Ms. Taylor. When we're looking at and really I'm wanting to form my question to echo some concerns that we heard from Chief Michano around leaving things in the ground and walking away from it. I think that's it's a fair comment to make, that we would be leaving things in the ground for millions of years, 7 generations plus. When we look at what we're leaving in the ground, and what ground we're leaving it in, how deep are we talking about? Is this Canadian shield? Is this something that Canada does differently than other countries in terms of us having granite and thousands of feet to drill into? Could you comment on what are we actually talking about with deep ground repository? And
I'm afraid that I'm not an expert on the depth of these particular facilities. I can assure you, though, that we, when a project like that is put forward and a proponent puts an assessment in front of us, we would be looking at the geological formation, we would be looking at the hydrology of the area, and then making sure that they've characterized the effects in a true manner, and that we would also look at the efficacy of any mitigation measures that they propose, and then provide our advice accordingly.
Thank you. And I've been fortunate to spend a lot of time underground in mines in Canada, and I know when you get out of the cage, you're in a different world. When we're talking about river effects and groundwater effects, the Ottawa River, what we're talking about at Chalk River. We're going from a safe situation to an extremely safe situation if we can find the right repository. Is that a fair comment? To Ms. Taylor?
I think that it's difficult to answer in a general manner. Every project gets assessed on its own merit and according to and I don't have the details in front of me of all the possible hydrological systems in play.
Sure. Okay, thank you. And finally, I'm just trying to wrap up our study here. With a minute or so we have left, is there a lead agency, or maybe could the Impact Assessment Agency talk about who takes the lead in these discussions when you're setting up governance? Is each project assigned a lead?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned at the beginning, the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada is responsible for conducting the assessments. And at the same time, we recognize that the Nuclear Safety Commission also has overlapping responsibilities. And it's the reason why we've set up a memorandum of understanding to deal with exactly, I guess, the governance issues of how these projects will be assessed.
Right. Because we have two government departments, and that always makes me uncomfortable. Do you go to NRCan? Do you go to Environment Climate Change? If you've got two bosses, I've heard it said in the past, you don't have a boss.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we have an excellent working relationship with the Nuclear Safety Commission. We've done coordinated assessments with the Nuclear Safety Commission in the past, and I have full confidence that we'll be able to undertake assessments in a coordinated manner in the future.
Great, thank you. And then we have international oversight. So we have checks on our checks, and then we audit those checks through international oversight as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank
you
you very
to the
much,
witnesses for a very good discussion.
Mr. Longfield. Mr. Seaback, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just before the end of the committee, I think we need to discuss the meetings over the break in consultation with my colleagues. We would prefer not to have a meeting over the break weeks coming up.
Noted. Mr. Duguid, you had something to say?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I can indulge the committee for 54 seconds.
Yeah.
March 22nd is World Water Day, UN World Water Day. There's a consortium of organizations involved in water, the University of Saskatchewan Global Water Futures, which is a research leader in the world, UN Water, I believe UNESCO will be there. And this group has planned an event that happens to overlap with the time of this committee. And I think 3 or 4 members of this committee have been invited to actually participate as panelists. Madam Posey, you would have received an invitation. I know Laurel Collins, yourself, Mr. Chair, and I've received an invitation as well. So I wonder if we could schedule our meeting for the evening that day. As you know, we often get bumped to the evening because of the Procedures Committee. And I wonder if we could indulge a committee to just do what we do when we get bumped by the Procedures Committee, which is just have it in the evening.
Well, I'll look at that. I'll look at that. We do have to be out of here, any second now. But Ms. Collins?
I just wanted to speak my support for both the Conservatives, given that it's their study, but also for Mr. Duguid's proposal to move to the evening. I just also wanted to note that Ukrainian government officials have reported that Europe's largest nuclear plant is on fire. And so I'm not sure if there's a way, Mr. Chair, but for us to acknowledge what's happening, especially given that we are studying nuclear issues right now, and just to condemn what's happening.
Absolutely. I'm sure that, yes, I have no doubt that there's unanimous consent around condemning the terrible situation that's going on, and obviously creating a real mess.
Agreed, Mr. Chair. Agreed.
Yeah. And you said something about the Conservative study, Ms. Collins. I'm sorry, I missed that part.
Oh, just on the break week, I believe that Mr. Seaback had proposed not having.
Yeah, okay, I took that. I'll take that under advisement for sure. Yeah, okay. Well, thank you. I want to thank the witnesses for an excellent panel and for making themselves available in the evening. And I know that cuts into family time and other things. So thank you very much. It's been a very valuable contribution to what we're doing, though. So it's greatly appreciated. And on that, as I said, we had to end at 8:30, so I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.